Hi everyone, welcome to Simple Life Strategies TV. I'm Zoe B, and today I have with me Bob Sutton, co-author of the book Scaling Up Excellence. So if you're a small business owner or you have managed a team, then do stick with us because Bob and his colleague have spent 10 long years researching this stuff, so they really know what they're talking about. And you'll also find out today what the significance of the number 7 is when it comes to managing a team. So do stick with us. We've got some great insights here about how to successfully upscale teams and organizations. Welcome, Bob.
It's great to be here, Zoe. I'm excited to have my first Australian interview.
Yay, me too. Thanks so much for being here. So tell me, Bob, what kind of triggered the desire to write this book? I mean, 10 years is a long time to devote to one particular subject. How did that come about? Was it something you always wanted to do, or was it more organic?
Well, it comes about, I guess there's two factors. One is we don't have real jobs. We're tenured professors, so we have, it's like we just sort of go on forever. So I think that's part of it. But the other part is I did write some other books in between, including one on bosses, good boss, bad boss, and I guess this started around the time that I finished a book called The No Asshole Rule. So I haven't done some other projects, but the part I think that really the reason this book took so long and the reason that we got so focused on it was that both my colleague Heidi Rao and I kept working with organizations, both big organizations that were trying to spread something good and little organizations as they got bigger that were trying to maintain and spread their excellence. And we kept discovering that this problem, the scaling problem, was kind of a universal challenge and also a universal management skill, this ability to, when you've got something good, to spread it further. But the challenge was that we also wanted to involve people who were knee-deep in this problem of scaling. So there was a lot of back and forth with people who were in the middle of it. So it really is for a book that's written for people who face this challenge or believe they will sometime in the future.
Yeah, so it's obviously a really common issue for companies as they grow.
Yes, big issue.
Yeah. What would you say, like, are there any kind of really key mistakes like that everyone seems to make? What would you say is the number one thing that people sort of struggle with?
Well, that's a good question. I think one of the key mistakes that people make in scaling, in fact, I just got literally off the phone with the CEO about 20 minutes ago who was talking about this, about how his company had suffered from this disease many times, which is in the rush to add as many customers and add as many employees as possible. What they do is they forget to focus on slowing down and doing things excellently, and also developing a product to sell. I'll give you one example. One of the small companies that we have that a case was done on by Stanford is called Waze. Waze is now acquired by Google. But when they hit about 20 people, the venture capitalists and other people were putting on this pressure on them to hire people. And what the CEO wanted to do was he said, we just got to focus on getting a few great customers. We don't need more people. And if we hire more people, in fact, it's going to just distract us. So let's just focus on getting those key customers who really love our product. And they kind of had a hiring freeze for about 4 or 5 months. And the rest is sort of history. Then they took off when they got their key customers. But he thought that hiring people and also going after smaller customers would distract them from what they really, really needed to become a great customer. So to me, that's having this sort of discipline to slow down now so you can scale faster later.
All right. So one of the parts that I really enjoyed from the book was where you talked about one of Facebook's core beliefs, and that is to move fast and break things. I thought that was really such a refreshing belief that's clearly driven by innovation, compared to sort of, I guess, beliefs around perfectionism. Like, how do you think that belief has served Facebook as a business?
Well, it's interesting because this idea of moving fast and break things has really been there from the beginning. And I think it's served Facebook. It's probably hurt them sometimes too, that they're pretty fearless about introducing a new sort of feature. I mean, you think that you even go way back to newsfeed, which was like 1,000 years ago. That actually met a lot of resistance, timeline, a lot of resistance. They're not afraid to do things that sort of freak out customers. They're also not afraid, although they've gotten a little more conservative in their old age, they're also not afraid to bring in a young engineer and to sort of give them the opportunity to even bring down the whole code base And in fact, I was literally just talking to a Facebook engineer about 3 weeks ago, and he said people take great pride in the fact that they've actually brought down the entire site before. So
Really?
this idea,
Wow.
which I'm not sure I would take great, but this idea that they give the engineers the sort of power to do it, and their whole socialization process, their onboarding process is based on this notion that that they have you work with 12 or 13 small groups. They call it during boot camp, and to actually make changes in the code base that are real changes. And one thing about that move fast and break things I would emphasize is that that's their sort of mindset or their set of beliefs that are right for their organization. Because as much as some of us may love Facebook, when it goes down, it's probably not the end of the world.
Yeah.
And there's other organizations that might want to have different mindsets. So I was talking to the head of engineering of a tech firm around here called VMware, and I said, "Do you move fast and break things?" And he said, "No, we don't do that, especially in the software we make for nuclear submarines, because it would be sort of a disaster." And you wouldn't want your surgeon to move fast and break things either.
That's
so
right.
A lot of it depends on where in the innovation stage you are and what the cost of failure is. But I think that's right for Facebook and the kind of mindset they have, and they do move incredibly quickly. That very courageous organization.
Yeah, and I wonder if that drives innovation in social media companies, which are purely about social networks and things that are not necessarily life or death. Do you think so?
Yeah, I think that's right, and really, I mean, Twitter too. Which we actually know we've been spending more time with the folks at Twitter. Their definition of move fast and break things is also important. But I would also add Twitter's sort of interesting because there's some things you can break and some things you can't. Things like pushing your customers or user sensibilities really far is probably reasonable. But some of us who have been on Twitter for a long time may remember the fail whale, and it used to fail. Yeah, and since, in fact, one of our scaling heroes is a guy named Chris Fry, who's head of engineering, and since he's been there, they actually fail a lot less than they used to. And so there gets to be a point where too much failure is bad. So a lot of it depends what's the right mindset for your organization, and that's why we say scaling is about spreading and extending excellence. Mm-hmm. So in Facebook's case, it would be spreading that mindset to everyone, but a lot of it depends on what the organization is. Another organization in Australia, I assume you have Amazon since they've taken over the entire world. Is that correct?
Oh, yes.
Talk about world domination. That's what their goal is. But so I was giving a talk at Amazon headquarters in Seattle last week, and I asked them, and this is the question I always ask when it comes to scaling. Organizations at scale tend to be very clear about what's sacred and what's taboo. Mm-hmm. And so we said, what's sacred here and what's taboo? And they said at Amazon, the customer was sacred, and what's taboo is wasting money. And that's one of those things one of the reasons they can scale quickly is everybody in the organization operates on that set of assumptions. And that's very important for the entrepreneurs and founders who listen and watch your broadcast. It's very important that they be very clear about who we are and who we are not. And to me, that's a hallmark of what a great company is. I mean, in the early days, Google was very clear. I mean, they did things that were annoying, like they'd only hire people they thought were super smart, and they'd insist that they be nice. So that was sort of what I think of Google culture, and I think that's one of the things that really propelled them sort of forward. So you couldn't be a jerk, but you had to be super smart, and you can still see that in the culture to this day now that it's a huge company.
Right, and you can see that with Apple as well, and you talk about that in the book, don't you? How secrecy is obviously one of their key beliefs.
Oh yeah, and you don't have to be as nice at Apple as you do at Google either. I mean,
well, Steve Jobs set the stage for that pretty nicely, didn't he?
Yeah, well, but it's just not as warm a fuzzy a culture as I mean, Google. Even like the lawyers and accountants are warm and fuzzy. It's kind of weird. And some of my friends who have worked there have said that I'm just not that nice and warm and fuzzy, and they had to go work somewhere else. So you have to pick a culture that fits you. That might not be your cup of tea to be all happy and perky all the time. It's kind of exhausting.
Yeah. And another part of the book that I really, really found fascinating was where you talked about the importance of senses. And I mean, my background's actually advertising. I've worked in some of the big global ad agencies and co-founded my own marketing agency, actually. So, senses and how you, I guess, change behavior through things like that have always really interested me. You talk about one particular piece of research where they studied the sales of wine in stores, and when
Yes.
they played French music in those stores, they sold 5 times more French wine. I just thought that was incredible.
And people don't even realize it's happening to them. That's the
Yeah,
incredible part.
subliminal,
It's just sort of like
completely.
they don't even know it's happening to them. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, so companies can actually use very subtle sensory signals to trigger, I guess, their cultural identity and their values and beliefs.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting because one of the key points is that if you're trying to, if you will, spread and infect people with a mindset, one of the worst things is when you have, in fact, one of the people who we interviewed for the book, Karen Krikorian, she talked about dissonant details, and especially with that subtle stuff, you've got to be careful for things that don't quite fit with the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So later on in the book, we talk about how Starbucks, the famous international coffee chain, one of the problems they've had with sort of reinforcing the the coffee shop mindset is they no longer grind beans, so you don't hear the sound of the grinder, and you don't have the smell of the coffee. So it sort of undermined the sort of coffee shop feeling, even though people don't even realize for the most part that it's happening. And for your entrepreneurs, I would especially, and people who run small businesses, I'd especially be careful of the language that people use, since language can be a very sort of a powerful cue. So if you use dull, boring language and you claim to be an exciting place, it's not going to work. And it's dress, smells, all that other sort of stuff can be very powerful.
Right, yeah. So it needs to match, the beliefs and the values need to match up with the behavior, obviously, so that you've got that continuity.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, I've actually studied neurolinguistic programming, and there was another section in the book that I really, really found interesting, and that was where you talked about what comes first. Is it the belief that then triggers behavioral change, or is it the other way around? Is it the taking action and changing your behavior will then change your belief? And I thought that was such an interesting topic, because that's something that I work with people in a coaching capacity, and that traditionally what I'll do is we'll look to change the belief first in order to then trigger the behavior. But what you found was that both ways around work. Is that right?
Yeah, both ways around do work. And in fact, in psychology, there's this long-standing controversy: what comes first, the belief or the behavior? And as you say, the answer is sort of yes. That the main thing is to start with one and get the other one going, sort of in this virtuous circle. But the interesting case, and this is what just about every cult, every military does, every organization that has a strong culture, is kind of no matter what people are saying, if you can get them to live the beliefs that you want, eventually their minds will shift. And one of the examples we use in the book was a U.S. airline called JetBlue, that they made a bunch of changes, but what they really wanted to do was they had grown up to the point they wanted to switch the mindset from one where, well, we do great things because we do individual heroics, versus being part of an integrated system, to do more like systems thinking. And that was really, they did that by actually getting people to live the behavior. And even though when people said, will this work? Do you believe in this? They said no. As long as they were marching forward in that direction, it worked. And my friend Bonnie Simi, a pilot and executive who led that change, says that just getting them to march in the right direction is the most important thing. And as I say, every military and every cult in the world knows that socialization technique, and it's part of infusing that mindset in people that enables greatness to happen.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, because it's almost that whole innate desire in us to be congruent with our behaviors and our beliefs. It's almost like if we behave in a certain way, it then doesn't feel right unless we change our beliefs, right? It feels
it's the old-fashioned.
And it's almost like, and you can see that with behavior, when people are saying something and their body language, it's like if I was to say yes and do that, it just looks weird, doesn't it? It doesn't look, people can tell that it's
weird.
It's not matching up. I think what's really interesting as well is how differently companies are run when they're run by entrepreneurs as opposed to other businessmen, if you like. And I was listening to an interview by Richard Branson last night, actually, and he was saying that he thought that Steve Jobs actually didn't really fit the traditional model of entrepreneur, and that he was more of a manager, in that he was very hands-on. Yeah, he actually said he wouldn't consider him to be a classic entrepreneur, because he wasn't interested in purely sort of ideation and ideas, and he was more interested in being hands-on and managing every single aspect of the product. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how different is it when you have an entrepreneur? Yeah.
Because there was lots of things that Jobs wasn't good at and had no interest in. For example, one way in which he's not at all like a manager, since I know a lot of members who were on his top management team, is he never thought about money at all. He only thought about doing great things. I think that's pretty entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
And Jobs always said that the entrepreneur who reminded him most of himself was Mark Zuckerberg. And the reason is because both of them, first of all, remember Mark Zuckerberg turned down $1 billion for his company fairly early on. So, once you're a billionaire, I think you have enough money. He was not doing it just for the money. That they had this desire to sort of build things. And the other thing is that they were both completely obsessed with the product and didn't care so much about other things. So I do think that they're, at least both of them are a certain kind of entrepreneur in some ways. Yeah, but Jobs was such a complicated character that anytime I think that you try to get any lessons from him, it gets really difficult because whatever he was is not replicable. I mean, so when I wrote this book, The No Asshole Rule, I had a bunch of local entrepreneurs ask me if they had to be an asshole like Steve Jobs, and my reaction was sort of, well, I don't think it's a very relevant question because he was so good at so many other things. He had such a weird profile. There's nice entrepreneurs and there's nasty entrepreneurs, but I don't think Steve's I don't think it's very easy to be like him.
Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely a complicated character. I just read his biography, actually, and fascinating read. But he's such a contradiction in so many ways. It's like you said, you end up kind of getting very confused trying to figure out like how his personality is sort of structured in any one way, because it's not really.
Well, one thing I would say, to go back to the scaling thing, since I don't have a lot of contact with Apple, because when your friends go to work there, it's like they enter some sort of witness protection program, and because the secrecy, they're allowed to do it. But I know Pixar pretty well, and I know about Apple. And one thing that to me is a hallmark of organizations that spread and scale excellence is that they're constantly restless about things not being quite good enough. And the focus really is on having people who have pride in doing fantastic work. And they might make money as a secondary effect, but they don't talk about money very much. They don't talk about growth so much. Really, the focus is how do I do great work? And if you can build an organization where everybody thinks and acts like that, with both Pixar and Apple, at least in their heydays, we'll see what happens with Apple. It's getting sort of interesting. To me, that's a hallmark of what a great organization is where people take pride in doing fantastic work. So, your fellow Australian Jimmy Spithill, who just won the America's Cup. So we actually had the privilege of meeting him and his team about a year and a half ago. Talk about a guy who that's what his focus is that we're going to do the best job we possibly can and nothing else matters. That's what you see when you see greatness spread. So if you think about the money or the fame too much, it's nice when it comes along for some people, but you look at Zuckerberg or Jobs or Ed Catmull at Pixar, that's not what their first order of business for them. The first order of business for them is to do stuff that they're proud of.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And it actually reminds me of that quote by Albert Einstein where he said, don't strive to make money, strive to be of value.
That's right. Same thing exactly, including to yourself.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, it's very true. So there's definitely a correlation between. It's interesting though, because it's so the opposite of how traditional business was taught, if you like. I mean, I'd be interested to hear how at Stanford things work. In that, obviously the main aim of a business is to make money. That's what is that a definition of a business? I don't know, but this entrepreneurial style model is so completely the opposite to that. It feels like.
Well, I mean, I'm not denying the importance of money, but in some ways, maybe it's like a Jedi mind trick. But what the best managers might do is they might sort of think about money occasionally, but really turn people's attention to how great the stuff we're doing together is. And then, that's how we're going to make money, by doing great stuff. But if you just think about the money, sometimes it's hard to get there. Now, it is, you are right. When you look at things like financial services, I have lots of friends who work in financial services. they're much more explicit about thinking about the money. So
Mm-hmm.
so I think you are right. I think it is a different sort of mindset. But in financial services firms, frankly, it does work because that's what motivates them, and they take pride in making more money than anybody else, which is different than making the greatest possible product you possibly can, for example.
Yeah.
Or the greatest film if you're in another industry.
Yeah, it's so interesting how there's how things are changing like through the diffusion of technology and entrepreneurship, and yeah, it's just I have no idea where it's heading, but it's definitely an interesting ride, that's for sure.
Yeah, nobody ever. But what is it? People who predict the future are almost always wrong, so I wouldn't believe them.
That's true. So, Simple Life Strategies is all about marrying thinking, smart thinking, but along with practical steps that people can implement into their lives. Like, what if there was one piece of advice that you could give to entrepreneurs who are trying to scale up? What would you tell them to do? What could they go and do right now today? What would their first step be?
Well, I think I'll give two pieces of advice. I'll cheat. The first one is that although moving fast is great and making fast decisions is good, sometimes one of the way we put it in the book is sometimes the best advice is don't just do something, stand there. And when things really get difficult, sometimes the best thing to do is to slow down for a couple days instead of running around like a chicken with your head cut off, and think about what you actually should do. And entrepreneurs are the most action-oriented people I know. It's really hard for them to do it, but slow down, talk to everybody you know who is smart, put things on hold, and don't answer people's questions. Say, wait, I'm going to take a couple of days and figure it out. And at least every entrepreneur I know, they just want to do stuff. They can't. They're very action-oriented people. And the other thing, and we talk about in the book as organizations grow, you do need to add more hierarchy. Entrepreneurs don't like hierarchy. You do need a little more process. Mm-hmm. You do need that kind of stuff to sort of grow up an organization. And we give various advice about that. But if I was going to pick one thing, I would especially warn entrepreneurs to be careful about not making teams that are too big. And you think of this starting when you have lots and lots of people, but to go back to that organization Pulse, which I talked about, they were really interesting because they reached this point where they had just 11 people, and the place sort of went unglued and went out of control. And the two guys who founded, Ankit and Akshay, when they broke those 11 people they had the problem with 8, and they broke into 3 teams, and they broke into 4 teams of 11. Then they could sort of take control over the place because an 11-person mob was too much. So really watch the group size as you grow your organization. And it's interesting. So that's an 11-person organization. And if you go all the way up to Amazon, which I said I was there last week, Amazon still operates on the 2-pizza rule, which no team should be big enough that it takes more than 2 pizzas to feed it. So that's about 5 or 6 people. Right. And so that, to me, that's something that will get you all the way from very little to quite big. As you can see, from Pulse with 11 people to Amazon, I don't know, there must be 200,000 people work for Amazon, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I actually saw that when I worked in ad agency land, in that we would have separate account teams throughout the various size businesses that I worked for, in that you'd never have really more than sort of 8 or so people on an account team. And even if you had sort of a really large client, like a huge global client, then that would be then segmented into sort of sub-teams within that.
Yeah, that's the way the good professional service firms do it. And in a professional service firm, you tend to be worried about the cost of it. But even in organizations that have sort of unlimited money, they learn that smaller teams tend to be more effective. So it is one of those important things. The other thing is it isn't just there's 2 reasons that smaller teams are more effective or big teams are ineffective. As a team gets larger, lots of evidence you spend more time doing coordination and less time doing the work. And also what happens is, I always do the analogy, the difference in going out to dinner with 4 people versus 10 people, like the interpersonal relationships start sort of falling apart for the group as a whole. So for both of those reasons, focusing on keeping the team small is really an important thing to do. And as I say, it happens very quickly. This isn't for a giant organization. It can happen with 10 or 11 people.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much for that advice. That's wonderful. I'm sure everyone will go and take that on board and make some changes today. So just to recap Bob's Simple Life Strategies today, number 1, when things get difficult, instead of taking immediate action, Slow down and take a few days to figure out what you really want to do next. Number 2, keep your team small. Don't grow too big too quickly. And finally, what is the significance of the number 7? Please enlighten us.
The number, oh, you're asking us about the number 7. Well, so there's actually a 1960 article, famous article by a guy named Miller, famous psychologist. And what he showed is that we as human beings can't hold any more than 7, but 7 plus or minus 2, any more than sort of 9 bits of information in our head. So that's where you get this sort of team size of sort of 5 to 7. And there's just another startup that I'm doing a little work with. In fact, I'm going to visit them later in the week. They're in Canada. They're called Build Direct. Just got $30 million with a venture capital firm, $30 million with venture capital money. And what they do is they deliver sort of like heavy building materials, like roofing materials, flooring materials. And they have this thing that I just love, which is that they call it the 5 rocks. So what they have is an aquarium with 5 rocks that represent 5 goals that everybody in the company is supposed to follow. And every 60 days, they spend a couple of days to talk about if they have the right 5 goals, but they never have any more than 5 goals. They're always taking out rocks and putting rocks back in, and each rock represents a goal. And so that's the number of goals that people can hold in their heads at once, and that's back to this idea of 7 plus or minus 2. So a lot of this has to do with having this kind of focus that entrepreneurs need, and also avoiding putting people in a situation where their brains are overloaded with too much stuff to think about.
Yeah, and I think that's especially important for entrepreneurs because they tend to be very creative in nature, and they have so many, and I find this with myself, I have all these ideas constantly creating, and then it's about, you physically cannot focus on all of those ideas at once, so it's about getting clear about your priorities and really streamlining which areas you're going to focus on.
It's sort of interesting. This is just for entrepreneurs. I'm not sure this is for all scaling, but one of my colleagues, one of the heroes of the book, is a guy named Michael Deering, he's a very successful early stage venture capital around here, capitalist. He's funded 80 different companies, a lot of companies, some quite successful. And anyhow, so when Michael's interviewed about 4,000 potential entrepreneurs he's going to fund in the last 6 or 7 years. He said one of the things he looks for is he calls it X is great, Y is shit thinking. So he likes people who think binary, like either something is really great and we're going to pursue it, or it's just crap and we're not going to do it. And otherwise you don't think about it. And I think that sort of decisiveness, although they probably make as many mistakes as anybody else, is probably a hallmark of great entrepreneurs because you're just really focused on what you're moving on. Yeah. So I thought that was sort of an interesting way to sort of remove uncertainty and load on yourself. And entrepreneurs, when the thing that used to be great sometimes becomes shit, and they're really good at sort of changing gears. But that idea of being decisive and moving forward, I think, is a hallmark of great entrepreneurs. And I think of our university president here at Stanford, John Hennessy, who is also an entrepreneur himself and is also the lead board member of Google. So he's an unusual academic. He's actually done things. Wow. And John is completely like that. If you talk to John, he says, yes, no, I'll get back to you later. Very, very decisive person. And I think it just speeds decision making. I don't think you necessarily have a higher hit rate. You just keep things moving along more quickly.
Right. And I wonder if that is because you read that a lot of entrepreneurs very much trust their instinct and their gut decision making. So, I wonder if that's what enables them to make those swift decisions. If they're very sort of intuitive in terms of what feels right and what feels wrong. Because I read that a lot.
Yeah, I think that's right about the intuitive. Although, back to the kind of approach that organizations are going to scale, some organizations around here and other entrepreneurial organizations are much more evidence-based, and some of them are much more intuitive-based. So, I mean, if you a good comparison, big organizations is Google is the most evidence-based organization I've ever seen in my life. Everything has to have an evidence-based case, including who they hire, what food they buy. It just goes on and on. And Apple is sort of the opposite. Historically, Apple's been very intuitive. We know what's right for you. It's a sort of a gut emotion thing. So again, it gets to this sort of culture you're trying to scale. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons you don't see much movement between Apple and Google. Especially among executives, it takes a different kind of person to work there.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me today, Bob. I've really enjoyed this. I absolutely loved the book. This is it here. And I think what I loved about it the most is it is just jam-packed full of research and stories and anecdotes and insights. There's so much stuff in there. I can see that there's 10 years worth of stuff in there. Like, I had a whole list of questions today, but I've only got through a couple of them. Yeah, so please do go out and grab a copy of this. Where can people get this from? They can buy it online, Amazon, no doubt, I'd imagine, or
Online.
Yeah.
My Australian publisher tells me it's in all major bookstores,
Okay.
and so I have to believe them.
You can't go
But also
wrong with
online,
that,
yeah.
can you? Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Bob. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Zoe.
Thank you, everyone, for watching. I would love to hear from you about your own personal experiences with your own businesses, your own small team. So please do leave a comment. What's worked for you? What hasn't worked? Leave a comment below the video here, or you can head over to simplelifestrategies.com and leave a comment underneath the post there. If you have been inspired by this video, please do share it with your friends and family and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And if you'd like to receive free Simple Life Strategies into your inbox each week, head over to simplelifestrategies.com where you can sign up. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Zoe B, and this is Simple Life Strategies TV. I'll catch you next time.